Apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Sharp, Whelan, Lehman and Warwick.
Thank you, Pippa. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Does anyone have any interests to declare? No, thank you very much. Duly noted. Item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have the panel's consent to sign the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 25th of September 2024? Yep, okay, thank you very much. Item number 4, update on actions and recommendations from the previous meeting. This agenda item is an update on the actions and recommendations raised at the previous meeting. Commissioner, is there any updates that you wish to share with the panel?
Chair, thank you. I understand there was a query or question raised following my departure around the early release process for prisoners that we currently have in place. Fairly complex. On 2 levels, I personally have been involved in some significant briefings at a national level, at the very highest level with ministers. Locally, I chair the Local Criminal Justice Board, which brings together all of those relevant parties, probation, courts, Crown Prosecution Service, police, etc. And this has, as you can imagine, been top of the agenda at the last 2 boards. There is more detail, and my team have put some detail, which I'm happy to circulate. I think it's fair to say here in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we haven't seen significant impact. Yes, there's been early releases, but we haven't seen the significant impact that may have been seen in other places. And probably more importantly, I'm reassured following my meetings at the Criminal Justice Board meeting and outside that the partner agencies are collaborating and working very closely. So that's the prisons, probation, and then the police managing risk once released into the community. So that's an update. It's something I will continue to monitor moving forward. It's obviously a national issue, but I think we're pretty much ahead of the game as best we can be here locally in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Item number 5, public questions or statements. Were there any questions or statements received from members of the public, Pippa?
Sorry. We've had 2 questions received from a member of the public who is here to ask his question in person.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fulton, when you're ready, would you like to ask your first question to the panel, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. The single justice procedure is a secretive procedure used in the magistrates' courts in England and Wales, which deals with nearly 800,000 cases annually. Single justice procedure hearings take place behind closed doors, away from the press and public, and they have routinely resulted in people with dementia, learning disabilities, mental health conditions, and terminal diseases facing harsh prosecutions. Often, the magistrates deciding these cases do so without knowledge of the defendant's mitigating circumstances. Does the PCC regularly review police charging decisions in offenses subject to the single justice procedure through random sampling or otherwise? And if regular monitoring is occurring, is the PCC confident that Cambridgeshire police are properly exercising their prosecutorial discretion in accordance with the Code for Crown Prosecutors, particularly in regard to the public interest test and mitigating circumstances relating to vulnerable defendants?
So thank you for this question. I will read the response to ensure accuracy. So police and crime commissioners do not currently have a specific role in the single justice procedure. If an individual or company has been charged with a minor criminal offence, the case may be decided by a magistrate without going to court. In terms of policing, the procedure is relevant to some motoring offences, whereby a specialist police team prepare cases which are then managed by Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service. The Chief Constable obviously has operational independence in this area. Equally, guidance relating to the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner within the criminal justice system is clear in terms of respecting the boundaries around the independence of criminal justice processes. Now, whilst I do chair the local criminal justice board, national guidance is clear that prosecutorial and judicial independence and decision-making must be respected. I am aware of concerns raised nationally about the procedure, and I understand a minister responsible in the Ministry of Justice has recently in Parliament committed to reviewing the procedure. The minister is also committed to discussing with prosecutors ways in which the public interest can be considered in advance of making prosecutions. The Minister has also clearly stated the importance of the procedure in the efficient running of the Magistrates' Court, while recognising that it must operate fairly and effectively.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Fulton, you may have one supplementary question, providing it's directly related to the response you've just received from the Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the Commissioner for his very thorough response. Police forces have a duty under the Equality Act to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that individuals with a disability are not substantially disadvantaged in their interactions with police. Both the College of Policing and the Independent Office for Police Conduct have published guidance specifying how police forces should discharge these obligations. Would the Commissioner be willing to review whether the constabulary has adequate mechanisms in place for monitoring compliance with the Equality Act and the IOC guidelines on disability, and to report back to the Police and Crime Panel by the time of its next meeting? Thank you.
Chair, we'll take that away, but in summary, my initial view is yes, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fulton, you have a second question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could the Commissioner please clarify who bears responsibility for the force's use of covert wiretaps of electronic communications? And please state whether the Commissioner is aware if any individuals involved in lawful political campaigns in Cambridgeshire have had reason to be concerned about police interception and misuse of their private email and telephone communications.
Commissioner.
So, Chair, thank you for this question, Mr. Fulton. I will read the response again. Before I do, given I was a former police officer and I actually operated covert operations, so I have a fairly good knowledge and understanding of the regulations behind this. So the Policing Protocol of 2023 is clear about the need for the Chief Constable to have operational independence. And the use of covert surveillance is an operational policing decision. I do not receive individual briefings on the police use of covert surveillance. The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 governs the use of covert surveillance by public bodies. This is also known as RIPA. The Investigatory Powers Act 2016 provides a framework to govern the use and oversight of investigatory powers by law enforcement and the security and intelligence agencies. If there are any concerns regarding the use of covert surveillance, independent scrutiny and redress is undertaken by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. They independently authorises and oversees the use of investigatory powers, ensuring they are used in accordance with the law and in the public interest. Investigatory Powers Tribunal is an independent judicial body. They provide the right of redress to anyone who believes they have been a victim of unlawful action by a public authority using covert investigative techniques.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Fulton, you have 1 minute for one supplementary question, providing it's directly related to the response you've just received from the Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chair. Police misuse of intercepted political communications has the potential to substantially undermine public confidence in local democracy. I know that the Police and Crime Commissioner is committed to protecting the integrity of the democratic process, and I would like to thank the Commissioner for promptly referring a number of matters to the Constabulary under Schedule 3 of the 2002 Act. However, I am concerned because the constabulary has failed to record the allegations and has failed to refer them to the IOPC as is required by law. The existence of the Investigatory Powers Tribunal does not mean that the police cannot or should not investigate offenses committed under the 2016 Act.
Mr. Fulton, is there a question in there?
Yes,
It
there
was 1
is.
minute to
I
ask
have
a
two
question.
sentences. I am certain that the public will expect these issues to be investigated before the local elections in May. Would the commissioner be willing to follow up with the chief constable personally to ensure that the Schedule 3 complaints referenced previously are properly recorded, that the victims are contacted, and that the allegations are referred to the IOPC as is required by law? Thank you.
Chair, thank you. My office will always hold the constabulary to account, the chief constable account, for the effective and efficient running of a police force. This also covers the police handling of complaints.
Mhm.
From my understanding, this is a question in relation to a complaint, and clearly we always hold the constabulary to account, but it is for the constabulary to deal with in accordance with the regulations and guidance.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you for your questions, Mr. Fulton. Right, we move on then to agenda. I think I've been calling it. So, agenda item 1: the police and crime commissioner's draft police and crime plan for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Commissioner, would you like to present this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to be able to present a draft police and crime plan to panel members today. You'll be aware that it's one of the responsibilities of police and crime commissioners that within a year of taking post, a plan must be produced, and it's a plan that the constabulary, the chief constable, and other partners must take regard to. Please note it is a draft, and I do welcome feedback and observations from this panel, which have previously on the previous plan been assessed and included where possible. Colleagues, you may, if you were familiar with the last police and crime plan, may see this. I think my phraseology would be evolution, not revolution, because I think some really good work has been done since the production of that plan. So this is building on my previous plan. I am aware that previously that was well received by this police and crime panel. Just a little bit of a description how we got to where we are, and I will hand over to Catherine in relation to consultation in a moment. I was very keen that this was accessible, readable, accessible, and it's a public-facing document. Having previously worked with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners elsewhere, I've seen lots of police and crime plans. I know what I want to read as a member of the public when I look at what I want locally from policing and partners. There is not an awful lot of detail in there, and that is for a good reason. There will be a delivery plan that supports this with the detail of what we're actually doing. And why? Well, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, I don't know what money I've got. We haven't had any settlements to date, and the next few years, I don't know. We can make assumptions, but I don't know what the prevention pot would be, for example, for commissioning services from my office. Secondly, we don't know what government priorities are at the moment. We have headlines around violence against women and girls and serious violence. They were already priorities here in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, both myself, for our partners, and for policing. And I welcome those priorities, and they have absolutely and will always be at the foremost of my mind and in the police and crime plan. And then, of course, there are just changes in the landscape and changes in attitudes and different things that we might need to be doing. So this is headline, it's strategic. Behind it, there will be a full delivery plan, which will be shared with this panel and discussed as we move through the term of office. The themes I have purposely kept thematic as well, and they are really very important to me. This is all about keeping our communities safe. That goes without saying. And for me, the important part of the police and crime plan is this real emphasis on prevention. Prevention being better than cure. The other thing in relation to prevention is that I'm aware that this can mean many different things and mean many different things to many different people. This could be target hardening your home. This could be rehabilitation of offenders. This is all important and will absolutely be part of my plan. But what's really, really important to me is early intervention. Our young people, keeping them out of the criminal justice system in the first place. And I make no apology that that's where I'll be absolutely focusing my plan and my work moving forward. Not least of which, from my background in policing, I worked in child abuse investigation, safeguarding, and it won't be lost on any members here that that's an investment that absolutely we should be making, not just for those young people, not just but those young people, but so we reduce crime, so there are less victims, and actually it's more cost effective to deal with problems up front than wait till they get to prison, where they keep going back to prison at another £40,000 a year. And we don't have enough prison spaces anyway at the moment to deal with that. So prevention is at the heart of this. Victims and witnesses will always be a top priority. In fact, it's a statutory requirement, but regardless of that, we will continue to invest in victims and witnesses services. We do a brilliant job here in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I would like to take all the credit, but I absolutely can't. We have some fantastic people in my office. Nikki is behind us. Some fantastic people in our victims hub who I met with recently who are passionate and dedicated to providing services to all victims of crime, whether they've reported that crime or not. And they are seen as an exemplar, as best practice by the College of Policing. So that to me is a really good tick in the box, well, not just a tick in the box, but a really good view on what our victims and witness hub do. The next bit, it would be remiss of a police and crime commissioner not to include tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. Now, personally, it won't be my job anymore to be doing that out on the streets, but my job is certainly to hold the police to account, to ensure that the Chief Constable has the resources to do this effectively. But most importantly, and part of my role in convening partners to the table, is that I've always said police can never, ever arrest their way out of any crime type. They just can't. And the solutions often lie elsewhere. So I will be supporting community safety partnerships. We've done some great work with those already. I can't make firm commitments until we know the budget, but trust me, I'm making a commitment that I will be supporting our community safety partnerships through my term of office. And last, but by no means least, is building on trust and confidence in policing. Those members that were here earlier with the Chief Constable, this is a priority nationally, regionally, locally, and will be a priority for me. I passionately believe that the vast majority of our police officers and staff do a fantastic job putting themselves in the way of harm 24/7 to keep us safe. But I also know that where things go wrong, policing and the wider community needs to be robust in dealing with that. We need to ensure that we have the right people in our police service, and that when things go wrong, they are dealt with swiftly and that we learn lessons. I'm confident that Cambridgeshire Constabulary is in a good place, but knowing that there is always more to do. And that's why I will support independent scrutiny panels and other areas of investment in those sort of vetting procedures, etc., to ensure that we have the right people. Chair, if I may, I'll move on swiftly to engagement. I will hand over to Catherine, but just before I do that, we did a survey because we always do surveys, and it's always difficult to get significant response. Actually, in the realm of things, this was a pretty good response if we put it against other local public sectors who have organisations like the Combined Authority have recently done surveys and got far less than this even. And I'm also aware that the sort of people who answer those surveys tend to be, well, people that look like me. So although it's important, we've looked at those and there's been some fantastic feedback. That wasn't the important bit. The consultation we've been working hard on doing. And Catherine, if I may, Chair, just bring Catherine in because she's been arranging much of this. Catherine, if you just briefly run through some of those people that we've reached out to.
Thank you, Commissioner. I won't keep you too long. So yes, as we brought a paper to the September meeting where we presented the findings of the online survey the Commissioner's described, we were well aware that those results were not wholly representative of the community. So this is a piece of work that we've been doing, not just in terms of this plan, but other engagement throughout the Commissioner's previous term in office and this one, and that is to reach out to those that we would define as seldom heard from, and that's the people who are just not engaged with the process at all. So we've made a number of initiatives over the last few months, either working with partners that are seen as trusted individuals within those particular communities, or working with representative groups and non-least the community safety partners in terms of reaching young people. So that you'll see in the paper one of the biggest pieces of work has been with young people. And I was delighted to see a number of head teachers around the county supporting Daryl's presence in schools. So during the curriculum, sort of part of the curriculum where young people are asked about their feelings of community safety, their awareness around knife crime, issues like that. Had some very energetic sessions with some of the young people, which also included students of criminology, so quite helpful there. Another area where we feel we could always be doing more is with the disabled community. So we have now a nice relationship with Speak Out Council, which is a county-wide organisation. The Commissioner was invited to meet a group just last week, and there's another one coming up. And again, a very energetic and insightful session with some disabled people, raising some of the issues around equality and diversity that we all understand. So, you know, people with autism and learning disabilities and how we communicate with them. So nice relationship there. Obviously, business and rural community, we often get a smaller response for people who are working in the business and rural industry because of sheer time. So online surveys are not easy for those people to fill in. So again, lots of face-to-face engagement. It's almost like back to pre-COVID times with that importance of listening to people. And then we did a piece of work with the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community through one of our commissioned services, which is One Voice for Travellers. And again, trusted individuals that are within that community and a number of really important responses from that group. So I think apart from that, there was also interaction with Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum. And I just wanted to add here that this is not, again, just about getting views on the plan, but it's about that continued and trusted relationship so that when issues come up, we're there to listen and address, but also things like recruitment for volunteers in the scrutiny panels. It's important that we had that breadth of the community represented at those. So I think I just wanted to reassure, and I know the Commissioner would like me to reassure that this work is ongoing. It's not just about the plan, but we've had some really effective engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you.
So thank you, Catherine, for the update. I suppose a question that could often be raised is, well, so what? Engaging seldom heard or hard to reach communities and all our other communities. For me, I learn something different quite often at these. I'll take one of the schools I was in recently. A lot of the young people there were worried about road safety. You know, so it's not just people in our town, cities and villages. It was young people worried about road safety. And we talked about a disability group that we visited recently, and they were telling me that, you know, that some people, and there's some disabilities where blue lights and two tones can cause all kinds of issues. And it's obvious when you're told, but, you know, until someone's actually telling you this. So it's important. And all of this is recorded. We take it away to the constabulary and they act on it. So, Chair, if I may, I'll take up no more of the time. Very happy to take any questions in relation to the draft police and crime plan for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Do we have some questions from panel members? Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I have a number of questions and a number of comments. Would you like me to do them one at a time?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I hope these are not too uncomfortable for you. In my role now as a ward councillor for Peterborough, one of the largest rural areas north of Peterborough, and also Peterborough City Council's now parish liaison representative, before that being the parish liaison chairman for Peterborough. When it comes to consultation, did you speak to parish councils? Because I am on that panel and we didn't hear about it in Peterborough. So there's 26 parishes in Peterborough with over 200 parish councillors who weren't aware. Secondly, earlier on today and today, you're talking about police presence, engagement, and also confidence in the police. I have to say in Peterborough, which I understand from a colleague on this panel, it seems to be sporadic across the county where some get really good responses. In Peterborough, we get very little. There's very little confidence in the police and the engagement is very poor. One example of that, which I'll give you now, is I'm currently working with the fire authority, because I sit on that panel as well, looking at taking those to schools to particularly talk to year 9 students around road safety, water safety, the issues with e-bikes, batteries, and also CPR. I've had the fire authority have been absolutely wonderful in dealing with this. I've spoken to the senior education officer at Peterborough City Council, who had a meeting with Hedge yesterday, and also the air ambulance are going to come and provide CPR. Over a month ago, I spoke to sent an email to one of your officers from Peterborough looking at engagement. Took nearly a month to get any response. I had a meeting with her earlier this week, and I have to say the response from her was quite negative. Yeah, we'll look at it. Clearly, I understand her words were clearly operational still comes first. We all understand that. So I think there's a lot to do with engagement in this area, at least. But as a colleague has said, that seems to be sporadic across the county. Some get really good response, some doesn't.
So thank you. I mean, I recognise an awful lot of what you're saying there, and I'll go up and down the county and speak to lots of people, and particularly councillors. Just a couple of bits there. I'll let Catherine come in on the parish clerks. I thought we had, but even if they haven't direct, we have a PCC newsletter, and it was in there. Now I'm sure we've sent that out to all parish clerks before, but we will certainly, because they are absolutely key. I completely agree with you, and if you haven't. If it didn't come to yours, and there's a reason behind that, and we need to deal with that. And I do spend a lot of time at parish council meetings speaking to our local communities as well. Much of the other thing you were talking around there, certainly about police presence. I mean, this is operational, but this is often about the visibility. I'll go back to what the chief said earlier, because I speak to lots of people, both within this job and on the doorstep. And a constant, and we heard from the chief, is that we want to see more police officers out on the beat. I get that. I understand that. It's a matter for the chief constable whether they do that. But I would make this observation. It doesn't necessarily keep us safe. That's the reality of it. That doesn't. Good intelligence-led policing keeps us safe. And from those high harms, obviously our detectives, we've got some brilliant detectives, they won't be walking up and down the street or in our villages, but they will be keeping us safe. That's not to say I don't completely accept your point. And that's why we've had a commitment from the Chief Constable, and it will be in my police and crime plan. Neighbourhood policing is the bedrock of policing. We have now a record number of police officers, many of them very, very young in service. It's going to take a while before we see their impact. But I would like to see that commitment from the Chief Constable to ensure that our neighbourhood policing teams are maintained and indeed increased. They will be, because we've just had an announcement from a new government that there's going to be 13,000 extra police officers put into local policing teams. No idea what that looks like. There's no detail behind it, but that should equate, and I will be fighting for at least 130 new police officers, staff, specials, whatever they are, so that we get our fair share here as well. The last bit you said is there's little confidence or engagement in Peterborough. I suppose that's depends on who you talk to. I'm not going to be defensive here. I know lots of good work does go on in Peterborough, but there's obviously going to be opportunities missed. I know that because I've been out with the police, I've been out with partners, and I know there's lots of good work. I suppose you can't be everywhere all the time. But you would have noted from my police and crime plan building trust and confidence. And I will leave this with you when it comes to building trust and confidence. And by the way, very happy to work with you on any of these points. We don't need to do it in police and crime panel. We'll talk. I'll come and see you and we will deal with them. Building trust and confidence. I think what damages trust and confidence in policing, yes, with some of these horrific national events of some really awful police officers doing some really awful things. And culturally, that needs dealing with in some areas. From a vetting point, that needs dealing with. But I'll tell you what impacts people more is that when they're in crisis, they need the police. They ring them up. They can't get through to the police in the first place. And then they don't turn up. Or if they do turn up, they don't do a good job. That is the problem. That's where people lose trust and confidence. Often people who have never called the police before, but then have a bad experience. Now, I also get lots of letters of telling me how brilliant the police have been as well. So I'm going to balance this. But for me, it's holding the chiefs to account to ensure that we have the very best police officers performing to the very highest standards, doing the very best job. And some of it is the basics, just the basics, talking to people, investigating crime, putting criminals behind bars if we have prisons, and that prevention bit underneath it all. But I'm very happy to have some of these conversations outside this meeting.
Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, sorry. My apologies.
Sorry, Kay, could I just come back on one point?
Certainly.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. One thing that I have noticed, especially in the rural areas, is when we do get a police presence, usually in a car, when they come, and I did actually speak to this person this week about it, which she acknowledged can happen, is when they do come to the rural areas, they usually sit in their car, possibly doing paperwork, which is fine. I'd rather them be sitting in a rural village doing the paperwork than sitting in Portwood police station doing it. At least they're out and about. But I think, like you said, intelligence is a big thing. I think should they get out of the car and walk and actually introduce themselves to residents, it shows, firstly, there's an actual presence, but also they can pick up a lot of intelligence while talking to people, especially around antisocial behaviour. So I think that's something that the Chief Constable could possibly improve.
Yeah, I agree with you. Talking to people that's what it's all about. You know, that's 90% of policing, talking to people. Completely agree with you. Obviously, you, you know, you said yourself that police officer could be doing anything, and I know that the chief's been very keen, as I am, because I probably shouldn't go down this road, but people will often talk about police stations. We want a police station. I think this is about the police turning up and doing a good job when you need them. I don't want them sitting in police stations. I prefer them to be sitting in your village, ready to respond in rural areas. And perhaps finally, rural crime has a specific mention in the police and crime plan. And this isn't about keeping a bunch of farmers happy. It's not about that. It's about this county is largely rural, and we're gross contributors to the Treasury because of the fantastic agricultural industry we have, both agritech and our farming. And they absolutely deserve, you know, to have a good policing service. And that's why, although operational, I will always encourage the Chief Constable to maintain our rural crime team, who are the best in the country.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I've got one quite local one and one more general one, Commissioner. So you mentioned that the young people that you spoke to when you went into schools were often very concerned about road safety. And we're very fortunate to have groups teaching young people to cycle safely and use the roads safely, which is brilliant. And I'm very supportive of that. But one of the things that you'll know that is a problem in our areas is speeding. And I've asked a lot of times about whether in certain villages which have the potential to be used as quick access routes into our main towns, whether we do have any kind of speed camera network. I ask this because I see them, there are very few that I see in Cambridgeshire, but I see them quite often elsewhere. And I just wondered, do we actually have an active network, and are they engaged with retraining people to remind people about, the dangers of speeding? And so do we have a speed camera network?
So in relation to speed cameras, I think this is multifaceted. So you have those sort of fixed speed cameras, which aren't always operated by police. Then you have sort of mobile ones, which are operated by policing. An area that I invested in last time around and will continue to do so is to do with road safety. I always say this because when we say we have a problem with speeding, actually the problem is about road safety. It's about people being killed or seriously injured on our roads. That's the bit we need to deal with, and that's why I will continue to support the strategic partnership across the county. Um, in direct answer to your question, I can take this away and come back and we can have a conversation. I do invest. The constabulary has a safer roads team. They're actually part of the special constabulary, but they do a fantastic job. They will go out and do mobile enforcement, and they can pop up in villages, etc. They will do it often on evidence base, so if there's some evidence behind it as well. But certainly, this is something you or I can take up with local policing team if you feel in your patch in South Cambridgeshire that's required. We can, although an operational decision, the constabulary certainly have the ability to go out and enforce wherever.
Thank you. Although, of course, when you've got a policeman with a high-vis jacket on and a speed gun in his hand, most people do slow down. It's when they're not there that's a problem. But the second thing was I wanted to bring you to page. It's 20 of our agenda, and let's just see what page of your plan it is. It's page 10 of your plan. And you're talking about early intervention and prevention, and it's building resilience to cybercrime and fraud. And this is just bringing us right up to date. Just this morning, as I was coming out to this meeting, and it's been around. You'll be aware of this alarm that David Attenborough raised, that he heard his own voice being used to advertise something that he was unfamiliar with, and indeed on. In Touch, the programme on Radio 4, they had the investigator Shari Val using her own My Voice is My Password for her own bank account, and it had been AI cloned and would have, it perfectly accepted it. She hadn't used that, but she'd used they have clever ways of testing the system. And what I'm concerned about is this is just like the point of an iceberg, isn't it? That of this unknown ability to scam us and phish us and all the other things that people do. And I just wondered, this is obviously something not just for Cambridgeshire Constabulary, but it's a bigger network of crime. And I just wondered, what is national policing doing about cybercrime, and have you got enough support?
I mean, Kaz, you're right to highlight this as a really, really significant area. We are all far more likely to be victims of fraud via cyber than any other crime. That's the reality of it, and I suspect probably all of us in the room, almost on a daily basis, there were attempts. This is a complex area. One, I do have a reasonable knowledge. I led when I worked at the Association of Police and Crime Commissioner as senior policy lead for cyber and fraud. And once again, there are lots of different strands to this. So we have what we call cyber-enabled crimes, and then there's cyber-dependent crimes. A cyber-enabled crime is a crime that can be committed anywhere, for example, fraud or theft, but is actually facilitated by the internet. Those cyber-dependent, we should also be very concerned about. So these are the things like denial of service. These are the ones that often hostile states use to go into the NHS and policing and other things as well. Coming back to your direct question, I think the national response is pretty good, particularly around dependent. I think we're seen as sort of world leaders in relation to some of those high harm. There is also a regional response. We have our regional organised crime units who have dedicated economic and cyber teams locally. And I think, as you mentioned, under prevention, it was a couple of years ago now, I think, that on one of the precept discussions we had, we raised local tax that actually went directly to fund cyber prevent police officers within Cambridgeshire Police. I mentioned earlier that the police can't arrest their way out of all crime. This is a prime example of one they absolutely can't, not least of which many of those perpetrators are in hostile states and can't be touched. This must be about prevention, prevention, prevention. I will continue to work with partners in messaging. I will continue to support our Eastern Region Business Cyber Resilience Centre. There's not enough take up. We try and advertise, and maybe that's something you can all help me with your networks. If we get some information to local businesses, it's a free service run by the police and gives some fantastic prevention information. And the other thing is, I'm open to all kinds of advice and offers on what we can do in this space. There's a lot being done by all the different partners, but this is absolutely an area. And perhaps you talked about fraud, which in itself is significant and be massively impactful. Of course, we have those other crime types, particularly child abuse, which for me is a top priority of tackling. It is a national one as well, but yeah, I absolutely agree with you and very happy to work with you in whatever we can do.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to, we have in various other councils that I work in, we have business coordinators, so I can certainly convey that information to them, which is useful. It's a very local question as well, but I have links through the county with our children and young people, and I'm very glad that your priority is so high for our child abuse and for children and young people, the concerns that relate to them. So if there's anything I can help with there, I'd be very happy to do that. But certainly I'm very pleased that that's one of your priorities. My third question was, can you give us an update on the police hub at Milton?
It's
This may not be the right thing to do it in, but if you want to defer that to a different paper.
it's being built. It's on target and on budget at the moment. And I think I think Phil's behind me. He's the one that's doing all the meetings. But I think, is it end of 25 that we're looking at now? Yeah.
Moment just under £40 million, which is budget was 48. So that includes some contingency as well, which obviously won't be needed, although lots of plans as you expect. But yeah, on target, on track, and within budget.
Can I ask that when that comes on stream, that there at least initially that there's active liaison with Milton Parish Council, just in case anything funny happens, and it would be good to be able to liaise with you directly.
Very happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you. I have several questions. Should I do one at a time or? Okay. Okay. So first one is about you mentioned early intervention, which is great, and I'm really glad to see that. I wondered if it was worth including in the plan something about the link between poverty and crime. I don't see a reference to that. And when you're making your commissioning decisions, I mean, maybe you already do this, but if you do, I think it would be worth mentioning in the plan that clearly people who are poorer generally are more likely to be victims of crime. They also may not have the resources to pay for certain things that may help them to be less likely to be victims of crime. They may not be contacting you as much, those kinds of things. So is that something you could include in the plan, or is it work that you're doing? Thank you.
So, Chair, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It is something we are doing. It's root causes. I'm not sure I'll take that away and we look at the wording, but it's dealing with root causes as well. So clearly poverty will be one of those. There are other factors as well. A lot of the bids that will be put into government, some of the criteria is often around some of those demographic factors as well. So completely recognise that. We'll just check that we've got the wording, etc. But completely with you. You would have seen, particularly around safer streets, most, not all, but most of those projects where we've received money have gone into those areas of more deprivation than others.
Thank you. So second question is about trauma. Now, sometimes this ends up a bit of a buzzword, but I think it is important to that the police are recognising the trauma that both victims and perpetrators may have experienced. And can you explain how far police currently receive training in terms of dealing with people's trauma that they may have experienced, how far they put that into practice, and how that is part of your plan going forward?
I mean, in relation to policing, that is operational. I mean, I know that they do receive some of that, but actually, more importantly, when it comes to dealing with trauma, and I have Nikki behind some of those services we commission, our police are a bit of a jack of all trades. But if we try and make them masters of all, then we will fail in their priority missions. So, for example, trauma. I told you I worked in child abuse investigation and sexual offences. When I did this, there was hardly any services out there. I know, Chair, you worked in this area as well. Now we have some excellent services, both the charitable sector, which I fund an awful lot of funding. So Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre, Peterborough's Women Aid, and they got some fantastic people there as well. I mentioned our Victims Hub. They're all absolutely trained in dealing with trauma. And these are all areas that I will absolutely to continue to invest in.
You mentioned road safety and that you have been investing in road safety. So can you confirm, are you still providing funding to the Vision Zero partnership, and is it still is it likely to be similar to the last plan, or are you not able to confirm exactly how much it will be because you don't know how much money you have?
That's a good question. So I will absolutely continue to support the road safety partnership, whatever that is, whether that's the Vision Zero as we currently have it. There is a post I currently pay for, which is a policing post, casualty reduction. There's two things here. Firstly, I don't know how much money I've got to spend in the future, which is why I'm not going to make an absolute commitment now as to what that looks like, because we just don't. Secondly, the funding streams we had for road safety previously has dried up. Uh, I won't go into the detail, but we just don't get the money in at the moment. That's no fault of our own. The money we used to get was from the driver awareness courses following being caught speeding. We're not getting that anymore because of the investment. And one of the reasons, actually, that the costs haven't gone up. So speeding tickets and the courses haven't gone up. But of course, the staff doing it all and everything behind it has. So that's a national issue that we will be taking up locally as well. Look, it's in the police and crime plan. When I know what our funding envelope is, I absolutely will be investing. I think what we need to do as a partnership, though, is ensure that we're investing in what works again, and making sure that we have a very clear role and ambition in what we're trying to achieve. I mentioned, for example, I have funded and continue to fund some enforcement activity, which is only part of it, because actually that's not going to stop people from dying and be seriously injured on our road. Quite frankly, it may help, but it won't stop it. So for me, this is that partnership that we need to come together, just making sure we've got safe roads in the first place. Um, the other bit for me, when it comes to road safety, is that the real game changer, I think, is going to be the technology. We see, far more technology in cars, making them safer. Um, but one of the biggest thing, and I'm going to come back to prevention and early intervention. I always recall when I first joined the police 35, 40 years ago, drink driving, it was kind of normalized. People just did it. You could spend all day, or certainly all night, every night, arresting drink drivers. What changed there was it became morally unacceptable. I'm pretty sure, well, I certainly wouldn't. I'm pretty sure my young people at home, I just don't think they would do it. It's become morally unacceptable. How do we make driving dangerously, fast, breaking the speed limit, morally unacceptable? So I'll tell you what I can commit to, I will be investing in the constabularies safer schools, who also work with partners, going into our schools and young people and trying to deliver this message. Because the consequences, if you do drive dangerously or someone else drives dangerously into you, it's probably one of the most horrific, violent, horrible things, and something we all need to collectively work to stop.
Okay, so I've got one about stalking. It's mentioned a couple of times in the preamble to the plan, but I didn't see anything specific on it later on. Maybe that detail's to follow in the the plan that will come later. So I think currently Cambridgeshire Police does some really good work on stalking, as far as I'm aware, with the interagency approach, and I believe that your office has funded that. So there's currently the national super complaint by the Susie Lamplugh Trust relating to police response to stalking. So I just wondered, again, you may not know until you have all your funding in place, but can you confirm whether you will be renewing funding or support for that interagency work? Is that something you plan to continue?
Once again, I think it's about 2 weeks' time we're being told that we'll get the settlement. But then there's some of the other streams as well. Listen, violence against women and girls is a national mission. I'd be very surprised that we can't exploit that locally. And I'd be looking and stalking is absolutely part of it. You will see, I think there's a picture in there. We've done some fantastic work with I think it's Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre, but some fantastic work across the county with education. And the education is primarily focused towards men, about spotting predatory behaviours, and stalking would be one of them. But then what to do about it as well. And we've now got our bus that's logoed. That's not the answer, but what we have done is trained all of our bus drivers to recognise this, and Stagecoach have informed their bus drivers they are allowed to stop if held anywhere under this scheme, and they could even drive them to police stations, to places of safety or whatever. So it's a start in the right direction. Fully supportive. We know what stalking can lead to.
Wait a minute. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Cameron and Chair, because mine's related to the question that you asked before, which is it's very gratifying that drunk driving has reduced, and I think you're right. We have a population of young people who actually don't indulge in drink so much, which is really very reassuring. I think something happened over COVID as well. Sort of young people becoming much, extremely responsible. But what about drug driving? Because I'm not sure that has quite the same opprobrium, and I just wondered whether you thought you can do anything there.
So thank you, Councillor. Yeah, this worries me. Drug driving. Having spoken to our roads policing teams, we are seeing, when I last spoke to them, more fatalities through drug driving than drink driving. This absolutely needs to be on the agenda as well. The police are now fully equipped. They have the means, unlike years ago where they can do roadside drugs testing. I'm actually the senior responsible officer across the county for implementation of the then last government's drug strategy. I'll take this opportunity to say that I do hope that this new government continues to fund that, because on so many different levels, most of it is focused at addictions and rehabilitation, but that reduces crime. But the other part of this is around reducing demand. And this comes back to me again about that early intervention and prevention, explaining the perils of drugs. And we need to be doing more in relation to that education piece around drug driving. It seems that some people it's acceptable to smoke cannabis and then drive a car. Clearly, it has to say not only is it a crime to be smoking cannabis, but and then drive a car, but we are seeing the consequences of that, and we need to be doing as much as we possibly can to tackle it.
Thank you. Councillor Holloway.
You'll be pleased, this is probably my final question. So this one refers to your comments about trust in policing, and I wondered, given we have touched briefly this morning on the riots that took place nationally and the really good response we had in Cambridgeshire, whether it's worth including in the plan something about the PCC's role, the office of the PCC's role in community cohesion, in working with minority groups who may be feeling scared, that even if they didn't, thankfully, have any activity in this area, I think it was a very worrying time for a lot of people, and I think that's an important part of your work potentially going forwards.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take that away and review that. That's a really good point. And I'll just echo for those not here what the chief said earlier. You know, we saw some horrific incidents around the country. You know, we didn't see that here in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, you know, and potentially we could have done, particularly in Peterborough. It was the fantastic work of so many people, actually. It wasn't just the police, they did a great job. It was the local authority, partners, charities, most importantly, the communities of Peterborough. And we didn't have any of those problems seen elsewhere, which just goes to show what a fantastic county that we have here.
I think Councillor, but okay, Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. Sorry, just the conversation we were having before made me think of it, and it is in here. I knew I'd seen it somewhere. Under your section of governance and accountability, you talk about knife crime and county lines, drug dealing have become more prominent. And the county lines element is something I'm really concerned about and feel personally it's so hard for any of us, even as ordinary individuals, but even as councillors, to know what to do to counter it. Apart from if we get reports of suspicious behaviour, to report them to you. And what I would say is, in the past, when I have had alerts like that, and I have raised them with the police, they have gone and done something about it, which is I very much appreciate. But I just wondered, is there anything else we as councillors can do to assist you in addressing county lines? Because that also feeds into this early intervention, doesn't it?
Well, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I could talk a lot to this because interestingly, this comes back to the essence of the plan. We would expect the police to get on with enforcing, you know, going after the dealers, etc., etc. What we have seen with the police is a complete step change in recent years as well. We had a case here in Peterborough where we had two older men drug dealing. They received prison sentences, quite rightly. The 15-year-old, who was also dealing, was actually treated as vulnerable and safeguarded as opposed to. Now, that would have been the decision of the Crown Prosecution Service, but there is absolutely no doubt that that 15-year-old was vulnerable and had been exploited. And hopefully now, because this is the important thing, getting the services to make sure that they don't continue on that path into prison or worse. To be quite honest with you, what can you do locally? So community safety partnerships, they're in there. I have a local problem solving post. If there is something specific to your area, and sometimes there is, please do contact them or we'll put them in contact with you. We have also invested significantly in some sort of resources, schools programs. So with your local schools, if they haven't, there's some excellent videos, which you've seen, I think, both of them. And I think the primary school one, particularly Watervix Primary School, that's going to be a really good resource as well. So this, particularly that early intervention piece when it comes to county lines, that for me is what we're all about. And the other bit, of course, is the Safer Schools team that we have within the constabulary, who have really focused on this, along with knife crime and some other areas. And actually, I said knife crime; it's just so often interrelated. I also chair the High Harms Board across the county. Drugs county lines are spoken about strategically across the partnership there as well. And we do have some fairly good support across the statutory partners.
Thank you. Can I just check, when you show those videos in school, are they being shown to parents as well and carers?
Thank you. That's a great question. I missed that bit, didn't I? Really important that we're actually educating parents to spot the signs. And I will tell you, this came to me probably third hand, but sometimes it's those who think they don't have the problem who have the problem. And quite often we've got to also, we talked about deprivation and poverty. Absolutely, we recognise that. But this is everywhere or can be everywhere. I mean, I don't want to frighten people, but the reality is, you know, you can get hold of drugs anywhere. And if you are perhaps more affluently living in one of our villages in South Cambridgeshire, this might not be high on your agenda until it does, because I'm afraid some of our young people that get into this world aren't just those from deprived areas. That's the reality of it as well. So it's really key. I know schools do a lot. in relation to this, I would like to see our community safety partnerships drive this. I happen to know in South Cambridgeshire they did, so we'll put you in touch.
We've had meetings regularly with them. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, as a former head teacher and a current social worker, there are a lot of good resources on the local Safeguarding Children's Partnership. All schools have the ability to refer in children to do risk assessments around criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, and there are an awful lot of good resources, not just the local ones, but through the Safeguarding Partnerships and through organisations like NSPCC. And there's an organisation called Think You Know, which is part of the CEOPS, that do a whole range of online resources from nursery children right up to secondary, but also for professionals and parents and carers as well. I would say raising awareness is probably one of the strongest local things that could be going on, because actually if adults become aware, they become more sensitive to changes around them. Thank you. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. Just two very quick questions. I was pleased to see in the report you've put a lot of emphasis on antisocial behaviour and tackling that. Two issues that we have, especially in Peterborough. One is graffiti and the costs associated with that, both for the City Council and parish councils and residents, that should it happen, you ring 101 to report it. And I think the common thing is now, because it's such a low cost crime, if you like, we just give you a incident number, crime number. That's their involvement done. That's fine, apart from when it happens weekly, over a year, that becomes a big cost, not only for city councils, but also for parish councils and residents. I think somewhere we need to try and find, and I know this is a big question, not an answer to it, but some way of recording it, getting a trend of where this is happening frequently, and try and put things in place that we can, whether it be covert CCTV or whatever, to try and stop that. So that's the first one, if you'd like to answer that. The second one's a lot easier.
So, a couple of things there. You say that you're reporting just getting a crime number because it's low, perceived as low, sort of harm, low risk. I am assured, and I will ask this question every time, and I will hold the Chief Constable to account, and I do, that any crime that is committed, if there are reasonable lines of inquiry, the police will investigate it. That includes shoplifting of any amount, and that would include graffiti, which is in fact criminal damage. So I'll have that assurance. And if there are any individual cases where that hasn't happened, you need to, well, A, get back to the constabulary, or B, get to me, and I can pass that to the constabulary. CCTV, etc. We do this already with our community. It was the Peterborough Safer Partnership. And in fact, I think we actually invested in some mobile CCTV around fly tipping and had some great success where it completely stopped. Can't see any reason why that couldn't be done here as well. So I suggest we have that conversation with our problem solving post, which is fantastic, in Peterborough, and see what can be done on your patch.
Okay, just a supplementary on that one. We actually did discuss this with the other Claire George, around using CCTV for graffiti, and they said they're not allowed by law. It can only be used for fly tipping. So that's something you can clearly take up with them. The second question, which I think will be quite easy for you, and it may not sit under your remit, but you're possibly the best person to ask, fly tipping. We have a massive issue, I think, across the county, but especially around Peterborough in the rural areas with fly tipping. The Safer Peterborough Partnership, Claire George's department, and along with myself, putting investigation tape out to all parish councils, are doing a fantastic job. We are seeing it, but it costs councils phenomenal amounts of money a year. I think one of the major issues for that, and I asked Claire, and it all comes back to the same thing, that the penalties imposed by the magistrates court don't weigh up the cost for them taking them to court in the first place and the cost for clearing this mess up. I know it may not be under your remit. What is your advice? Who do we put pressure on? Because the City Council can't put pressure on the judiciary. Who would you recommend that we try to put pressure on to actually get those fines increased?
So you said it might not be my remit. I've become quite experienced on this particular subject and have quite a bit of knowledge. Firstly, fines have gone up significantly. And council, so Peterborough City Council can fine, and they do. I can't remember the exact figure now, but they went up significantly. I think it was something like £1,000. So that was the last government raised the amount that could be fined. In relation to the fly tips themselves, we know a lot of good work has gone in Peterborough. I think you mentioned there one of the reasons, or you believe one of the reasons, is that the low penalties. I think you're right. That might be one of them. But let's be realistic about this. And once again, this comes back to how we actually deal with the problem. One of the reasons is it's very difficult to get rid of rubbish as well. And we see those conversations going on up and down the country. It's not like, many years ago, you'd go to the tip and you could take everything there. You can't now, and probably for good reason. And I'm out of my comfort zone, but that is one of the reasons we're hearing as well. One of the other reasons, this is organised criminality. Where there's money to be made, criminals will fill that space. So there is, on occasions, organised criminality. But my remit or not, I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner. Fly tipping is a crime, and therefore I will always do what I can within funding envelopes with partnerships to tackle it. And that's why I've also, you mentioned it costs councils a lot of money, costs farmers a lot of money, and landowners a lot of money. Often they're not cash rich, despite what everybody thinks, they're not cash rich. But if the fly tipping happens on their land, it's down to them by law to clear it up. That can't be right. You can't be a victim of crime and then have to pay to sort it out. So I do make some funds available on occasions, not all the time, to assist on private clear ups as well.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions directly relevant to the draft plan?
It was related to fly tipping.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I'm very glad to hear that you're supporting farmers in that, because locally what often happens is parish councils are small landowners and district councils, of course, are landowners, and it's the landowner's responsibility to chase up and get fly tips removed. And what I'm aware of in South Cambs is the enormous amount of work that officers are doing to ensure that fly tips are cleared up quickly so they don't attract more. And I'm hoping that there's a collaborative approach with district councils, who are the councils responsible for disposal of for collection of waste. So I'm just hoping there's helpful links there.
So just to reassure you, Councillor, I have met your enforcement officer in South Cambridgeshire. I think we were on the telly together following one of these initiatives. And I completely agree with you. It's the broken windows thing, actually. We did we did one in Fenland. That was a community safety partnership, a place where people are constantly dumped. It became a problem because half of it was council, half of it was private land. No one knew what to do and who should be doing it. I funded the local team, who were brilliant. I think it's the street team at Fenland. They came up with, actually, what was really good, we cleared away the rubbish. We prosecuted offenders because there was some evidence as well. Put up some signs, and to my knowledge, to this day, it hasn't restarted. And this wasn't just about rubbish on the side of the road. It was attracting drug use, antisocial behaviour. It looked awful. And we had good, law-abiding, decent people living nearby who had to put up with it. So I was really glad that we could sort it out.
Thank you. Any further questions in relation to the draft plan? Thank you. Members, we're being asked to review and comment on the report. Are members happy to move on? Yes, thank you very much. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, the Police and Crime Commissioner's approach to commissioning and grants. Commissioner, would you like to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. And I know a briefing's already been given to this panel. I was going to hand over to Nikki, our commissioning lead. Perhaps before I do so, I think there's one part in the report which says that we had recently got substantial assurance for our commissioning approach. In my words, I know that actually means outstanding, and I truly believe that we do have a really good commissioning process led by Nikki. So I think it's only right of me to ask Nikki just to briefly give the salient points in relation to this report, if I may, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not going to go through all the paper in detail because I think you've all seen it and we've had conversations previously. So the paper obviously sets our approach out of how we award funding across the county through our commissioning and grants function. It explains all the way through that we use the commissioning cycle as to sort of guide as our key principles, which is how we are able to be really agile and responsive in the way that we award funding in Cambridgeshire. In this financial year alone, we're overseeing a £6.4 million budget and personally managing 46 providers across 78 different funding awards. You'll know that funding for victim support services, and the panel's mentioned it quite a lot today, makes up the largest percentage of our work, which is £2.3 million. This is a statutory duty for police and crime commissioners to put in place victim support services, including victims of stalking, which we heard of earlier. But you will know that it requires quite a significant amount of governance, oversight and reporting back to central government, of which our team absorb, to allow our providers to focus on that delivery of frontline services. We make it as easy as possible as we can, taking a really proportionate approach to monitoring, to paperwork, to due diligence. We've already heard earlier that we haven't put any draft budgets in there. We haven't had our draft budgets. We're expecting our Ministry of Justice budgets hopefully next week, which will enable us to then inform our providers. It is a really tricky time for them because they don't know what their future looks like at the moment. But what we will ensure is that we do have every single victim of crime in our county will be able to contact a support service. Our victim and witness hub, who we've again talked about today, has recently received national recognition. The HMIC FRS in an inspection called it promising practice, and the College of Policing have only in the last couple of weeks asked us to put together a full document for their what works section on their website, which is absolutely amazing for us. And I think members of the panel that were here last year will know that we had independent consultants come in and review our hub because we were quite happy to say we thought it was great, but what we needed was that independent review, and they came in and agreed it was. So that was really great. There was some actions for improvements there, which we've been working through as well. I think the Commissioner's highlighted our VOG prevention work, which is the business against abuse work with Stagecoach, but this has been really highlighted lately. We've actually written a letter to the Home Office and also to the Department of Transport, just highlighting how we've got bus drivers now stepping in and safeguarding vulnerable people. We had only a couple of incidents recently, so that's something we'll be looking at for the future as well. I'm happy to take questions. You'll see the commissioning and grant strategy attached as appendices. And I also did another piece of work, which is just a one page, which just summarises all our work, looking at what they call in commissioning world a logic model. So it's showing everything you're putting in, the inputs, the outputs, and then the outcomes we're trying to achieve, which align with the police and crime plan.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
So thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Chair. Actually, it's worth mentioning again. You said an incident. This is always, for it's pleasing is not the word, but when we know we're working to try and prevent violence against women and girls. I did have an email sent through from you the other day where a bus driver following his training had recognised a really serious domestic abuse incident and following the training dealt with it, came through to the police. And I can give many other explanations. And you know what, if we're just saving one or two people from these most horrific and abhorrent crimes, then I will always be behind it. So nothing else from me on this paper, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any questions from the panel? Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. It's just one question. On page 40, item 7, page 40, it says that 996,956 under crime prevention was sorted for hotspot policing and community interventions to reduce ASB and serious violence in communities. This work is being led by the constabulary. It's probably a question for you and also them services. Are we able to ask for a briefing note to actually what those interventions were, rather than have it just under one thing, to actually see what they're doing?
I think you've got a yes there. And this was secured from government, this money. Just want to mention, because this is something I do know about. Firstly, antisocial behaviour sometimes doesn't feel like it in our communities, I know, but it's significantly down across our county. Reports of antisocial behaviour, which has got to be a good thing. But you know what we've done here? Coming back to the police can't arrest their way out of it. Not only have the police gone out, along with local authorities gone out, they've taken youth workers, detached youth workers, dealing with the root causes, dealing with the problems, so we don't just get called back when they've been told to scarper. So there's been some fantastic work. Once again, I think we're punching above our weight in this county across the partnership.
Thank you. Any further questions in relation to this paper?
I'm not sure did we get a confirmation that we would get a report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Thank you very much. So thank you, members. We're being asked to note the content of the report. Is that agreed? And are we happy to move on? Thank you. So we move on to agenda item 3, constabulary budget considerations. Commissioner, would you like to present this report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I will hand over Phil just to very briefly take us through some of the key points in the paper. Maybe if I can just highlight just a couple of things from my perspective in relation to the budget. Firstly, we haven't had the settlement yet, so there's lots of unknowns. And of course, that settlement will also be informing me the parameters to which precept can be set next year as well. I like to thank both Phil and the Chief Constable's Chief Finance Officer. We are seeing across the country policing and many other public sector local authorities in real difficulties. We're trying to fill and balance their budgets. We have continuously done that with the same pressures. So we have had some good people and some good oversight and governance in relation to this. However, I will once again make this point. Cambridgeshire Constabulary is one of the poorest funded police forces in the country, fact, and that's per head of capita. What that means is, and if you look in this paper as well, hopefully you've had a chance to read it, because we still, even though that being the case, we get less money than our most similar forces. What's not in there is some of our unsimilar forces, places like Cleveland, Durham, who receive far more than we do. Yet we're still able to have more police officers for the funding that we get in per capita. So I think the Chief Constable is doing a pretty good job in relation to the money that we are bringing in. And of course, my job is holding him to account, but I've got to also give him the resources to make sure that he does run an effective police force. So I still am very frustrated that the funding formula it is still not been changed. The last government had a chance to do it. They did not. The new government, I hope they will be listening. I'm not convinced that we will see anything change soon, which I think is unfair for the good residents of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. But there is another problem, and it gets quite complicated to explain, so I will try and keep this really simple. We've recently heard, in relation to the national insurance contributions, increasing employers. This is well played out nationally. This, of course, impacts us in the public sector as well. We have been informed or heard, we don't know, that government will be paying the bill for policing. If they don't, this will cost us 3 million per year. I mean, that is 3 million we just can't afford. That's people, because our vast majority of our budget, over 80%, is people. So that's people. And we've already cut down on our support as best we can. So we're now talking police officers, which we can't lose, because if we lose them, we get even less money because we've been ring-fenced. So that's a real problem. The problem is how they previously funded this, if government do fund it, is on our core grant. Now, that would mean we're not fully funded. We're 500,000 short. As we were with the pay increase, 500,000 short. That's another million. As a small force, as a small constabulary, this is really significant. But here's the worst of it. Some forces, for example, Merseyside, if they get it by their core grant, they'll get more than they need. It just doesn't make sense. It needs sorting out. I've written to ministers. I know our MPs are supporting us. Please do. Anyone that will listen to this argument, please do. I know the County Council recently passed a cross-party motion and wrote to government. And this is about keeping our communities safe. You know, this is about fairness. I don't expect we'll get the same as those big urban areas, and nor would I want it, because actually we do need to invest in there. Coming back to your point on deprivation, you know, some people in maybe some of the more affluent areas say, well, why is all the money going there? Well, actually, it's because it exports criminality as well as being a victim of it as well. But I will continue to fight the good fight and fight for fairer funding. This particular issue about national insurance and pay increase will hurt us if we don't get that sorted. So I'm rather hoping we will have some success to come back to this panel with. I was going to hand to Phil, Chair, but over to you because I know that there's some hands.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I guess my role is really just to reiterate what the Commissioner's just said. I think, you know, it feels like we're in an ever decreasing circle chasing our tails in terms of trying to make the numbers balance. Excuse me. We've got a number of upward only pressures, including the national insurance contributions that we just talked about, and the pay award that has just been talked about in terms of how we're funded, and a kind of a best case scenario if we're funded on the normal basis that we are via the grant of a shortfall of £1 million, and certainly well in excess of that if the funding is different. There's just a couple of other points to mention, I think, as well. In the second, the government's spending plans are being phased in two phases. Phase one is just taking us through into next year, and the following 3 years will be dealt with next spring. What the government has set out, and we don't know the timescales on this, is a 2% public sector efficiency target. So that's not going to be for next year, I don't think, but may well end up being the year after. So that we'll have that to deal with as well. There's also, from next September, departments are to self-fund their pay awards. So whereas we've been funded in the last couple of years for the sort of fairly high pay award last year, just over around 7%, and this year's 4.75%, albeit under the grant formula, going forward, departments have to fund their own. So that says to me there is no expectation of central funding for whatever we may award. Now, obviously, there's some balancing up with that in the future in terms of what the grant funding changes by year to year. And I think the other strand to this, which is making our lives extremely difficult, or will do in the future, is it's all very well to look at the nationally published level of either retail price index or consumer price index, and CPI is now what we tend to go on. But what we have within the force, excluding pay, is our own internal level of inflation. So whereas CPI is hovering sort of 2.5% to 3%, the government targets 2%, our own internal level of inflation is around 4.5% to 5.5%. So if the government bases its grant funding increase on an inflationary published level of cost increase, that is still not necessarily and very unlikely to be reflective of what we actually experience internally. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well. I think that they are the key points we wanted to make at this stage. As the Commissioner said, we don't know what the grant funding formula is going to look like. That's due out around the middle of December. We think that the precept limits will be out in the next couple of weeks. That information then needs to come together and knit together with the work that the constabulary primarily are doing around looking at their budget numbers. They're going through an extremely robust and challenging process and targeting all budget holders with a level of efficiency savings, and obviously a very iterative process they have to go through. When we get to the middle of December, we understand what the level of funding is and could be versus what is required to maintain a level of service, then obviously we'll be in a position to come up with a recommended precept number to put before you at a later date.
Thank you. It all sounds very complicated and a lot of unknowns. I'm sitting here thinking, cool, you're going to need some headache pills for that one. Any questions from the panel? Councillor Boyce and then Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. You raised the point earlier about the funding, and you could be £1 million, in best cases, £1 million. What are you doing between yourself and the constabulary to actually mitigate that shortfall in respect of protecting frontline services?
Well, as I said earlier, one of the issue with the frontline services, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, because we've got to maintain those police officer numbers. As I say, therefore, the risk is in the support staff. Before I directly answer the question, this is something I would add as well. One of the problems with government policies, whatever government you have, of more police officers, is that what you don't get behind that is the more supporting staff behind it, who are absolutely essential in making those police officers effective. I will just put that out there because that's unfortunately a real pressing issue for us. To me, if only we could, this would be about actually, I want you to reduce crime, Chief Constable. Here's some money. How do you do it? Unfortunately, politically, doesn't seem to get votes, but that's how you should do it. We should trust our experts to actually be able to deliver rather than tell them what it is they need to deliver it with. In relation to is there anything you want to add in relation to what we're actually doing to mitigate it? There, obviously, we're going to all the departments, doing all the usual thing, need to make cost savings, not only through the constabulary, but through the collaboration as well. So that work is being done. I think you've got to put that against the backdrop of we've had austerity. Policing has taken practically every bit of waste out of it that it can. Yes, there might be bits and pieces, but there's no big wins here. We're now we've done all the low hanging fruit. It's now the really difficult stuff. Anything you want to add, Phil?
No, I think you've covered most of the items there. I think the only other thing to add perhaps is the level of capital funding that we're going to experience in the next couple of years, particularly around the Cambridge South station, the Monkswood training site, where we do not receive separate capital funding for those big projects. That just makes life even harder, and we've got to fund those somehow. But no, as you say, Commissioner, it's about really challenging the budget holders in terms of what is doable, and almost, hopefully we don't end up in this position, but I guess where we're driving towards is getting to almost a menu of choices about what we keep and what we don't, and what's doable. But until we get numbers, very difficult to predict exactly what the challenge is going to be at this stage.
Thank you.
Thank you. The second one, you mentioned this disparity in funding between forces. We're one of the lowest. Again, this is a question for the chair and Dem Services and Legal. As we've done with the fire service, would it be any advantage if agreed by the panel that we write a letter to the ministers supporting fairer funding for them, if possible?
The more letters, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I would also, as part of your role on City Council, the County Council have done it. This certainly can't harm us. And this is, for me, isn't about policing. This is about community safety as much as policing.
I think it's fair to say we have done that in the past. We can certainly do that again and put our signatures to that. Yes. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. And in fact, Councillor Boyce has made the suggestion I was going to do, which is that we write again. No, don't worry, I'm happy to second it, because we have done this in the past, and I think we as a police and crime panel should do it. But yes, we as councillors can take this away to our district and city councils to do as well. But the thing I actually wanted maybe that we could feed into that request is, so I'm looking at the point, Cambridgeshire, how it's funded in comparison to our other neighbouring authorities and even authorities around the country. And I'm speaking informed by my membership of the Corporate Parenting Subcommittee, so that's our Children in Care, but also the Children and Young People's Committee. Now, bear with me, because what I want to say now is absolutely not implying that our children are in care are the source of our problem. I don't think they are. But what we notice in Cambridgeshire is that we have an increasing population. Lots of counties do, but we particularly do because of the last government and indeed this government's requirement that we, certainly in district council, should build more. And because we're recognised to be a high-tech hub, and so there's lots of pressure on us to build more houses in order to support this high-tech evolution in Cambridgeshire. We're part of a regional partnership. So that's been recognised by government and they're encouraging it. So there should be levers to say, well, okay, if all the districts are building more houses, that gives us more population and that gives us far more people that were in the census 2021, which is what this is all based on. But in addition to that, there are two further multiples on it. One is that we're getting an increasing number of children with special educational needs. This is partly to do with the kind of population that we have in this area, a very high-tech population. But it's also been compounded by COVID, and there's a whole cohort of children who have suffered from isolation. Their education has been harmed, and many of them have all sorts of issues. These are not necessarily the children causing harm. They're not. We are helping them. But they not only are there more children with special educational needs, but their needs are increasingly complex. And so this puts pressure on their communities, their families, and I'm sure in an indirect way in the communities, it causes more problems with antisocial behaviour, because you can be sure that there are some children that we as a county are looking after, but you can be sure there are some who are slipping the net. And so what I'm concerned about is this is the kind of information that we need to be feeding into this letter that says we need you to look at this funding formula more carefully, because the government is requiring us to create this a cauldron, but it's great. It's a high-tech area, but we've got so many development sites: Waterbeach, Newtown, Abington. We've got the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. All of this is attracting a much higher high-tech population with a much higher level of autism. You know, some of these people are absolutely brilliant because they have all sorts of abilities, but it does mean we have a population of children who need our care. And so we need to feed this into our letter to request a revision of the funding formula.
So certainly I think we need to put a carefully constructed and evidence letter together. Sounds to me through what you're saying, though, it's much wider than a talk around police funding, because the pressures on schools, particularly around special educational needs, are county-wide pressures, and actually it's a national picture, that pressure for supporting the more vulnerable children.
Funding formula affects Cambridgeshire as a whole, not only our police body. It affects us as a county as to how.
Yes, but I think in relation to this panel and this work, it's around the funding formula for the police, isn't it? Yeah.
Chair, if I may, Councillor Adam does make a good point. It actually comes back to how the funding formula is calculated. You know, it's based on things like how many pubs you had, and it's really out of date. What it doesn't take into account is, you know, some of those newer developments and changes, you know, changes in policing, changes in behaviour, public behaviour. And just on your point, I'm a school governor locally as well in East Cambridgeshire. I recognise massively the difference in relation to SEND, but so something that concerns me has always been around school exclusions and how we manage that. That's not a criticism of any head teacher. They're in a very difficult position. But how do we collectively deal with that? And now this new thing, which is more and more you, Chair, would know this about the emotional avoidance. People just not going to school and being homeschooled. All areas that we should be concerned about, I think.
I completely agree. Any further questions on this particular agenda item? No? Thank you. Okay. Thank you, members. We're being asked to note the content of the report.
We've made an undertaking that we will write.
Yes, we have, and that's been noted. Yes. Okay, so we're happy to agree the content of the report. Thank you. Okay, I think...
Sorry, Chair, forgive me, but it should be minuted that we not just note the content of the report, that we undertake to write a letter.
It has been.
It has been. Good. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that concludes the formal part of the meeting. We're now going to move towards the formal plan. I think, Chief Exec, I think last time we agreed you'd stay for the forward plan, so you can have input to that. But the rest of the Commissioner's Office, Commissioner, yourself, thank you very much for your attendance. You're free to leave if that's what you wish to do. Thank you. Thank you very much for your support this afternoon. Okay, so in terms of forward plan, hold on, because it's just disappeared. Anybody got any particular questions, queries, comments? Come on. There we go. Yes, Councillor Branham.
Thank you. Well, in view of the point that the Commissioner made about not knowing how much money he's got, would it be possible to have something to update us, either a meeting or whatever, or a paper when he does know what money he's got?
Well, we've a scheduled meeting for the 5th of February, at which point we'll be looking at final kinds of plans at that point. What would be your view on that, Jack, having just let Philip, your finance officer, go?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the timeline, but we do have a pre-brief. Obviously, whether we are informed of that and the timeline that we've got, obviously, my understanding is that information is probably going to be due just the week before Christmas, that sort of timeline when we start to get that information. But I'd just have to look at a pre-brief then in early January,
Yes.
around that, to sort of then give us some guidelines as to where we are with the funding. We should be aware, the precept levels, we should be aware, and then that will be will give you that sort of information. So I'll look at a pre-brief, and I'll go through the your exec to see what we can do around that.
Thank you. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Obviously, it'll be for yourself to invite whoever to the meeting.
Will we do full plan invite? Yeah, full plan invite. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments, input in terms of forward planning?
Just a thought, that pre-brief, that would normally be online, wouldn't it, rather than in person?
Yes, I think so.
that's
Yes,
absolutely
because
fine.
that increases people's capacity to attend, doesn't it?
That's fine. Sorry.
I see that we've still got, we've got a date for the meeting in March, the 17th. Is that the one that's on a Monday?
That's
Was it?
veto there.
No, the one that's in March. That's the veto one.
Oh, it is. We only have that one if you veto.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that would be draft for the next year. Is that
okay.
There's
no,
one scheduled for the 17th of March.
That's the veto.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's been confirmed.
The 17th of March would be the potential veto meeting.
No.
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 The
My
17th
understanding
of March,
is the 17th of February.
17th of February. So it doesn't help they're on the same day.
Yeah.
Right. So
17th
that
of
would be the
March.
veto meeting. This is going to be an ordinary meeting.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I think it's the meeting scheduled for the 17th of March is the one that's swapped to a Monday, just as a one-off. Yes. Okay. So we don't have any particular agenda items for that
and the one on the 17th of February, Chair, we only have, we don't agree with the budget proposal.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which in previous years we've not needed to hold that one. Okay. Anybody have anything else in terms of forward planning? Certainly, sir.
Yeah, so for the 17th of March, we're
Yes.
looking at the delivery plan.
Yes.
That's the key
Yes,
key item
we'll
that
be
we're
our
bringing
6
in
months
there.
nearly, won't we? Yes.
Because then we're going to outline how we're going to deliver what the Commissioner's just discussed. And I found that conversation really useful to highlight the points then that we need to cover as part of the delivery plan.
Yes.
Chair.
Thank you. Okay, is there anything else we need to consider? No? No? In which case, thank you very much for your attendance, your effort and energy and patience, those of you that were here from early doors this morning. We've achieved some good work today. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.